Imagine you've assembled a team of highly capable AI agents, each specialized for a different role, and you've wired them together to tackle something ambitious like planning a complex trip or writing a software system end to end. The team works beautifully until it doesn't. Somewhere in round 7 of their back and forth, something goes wrong. The output is incoherent, or the booking gets made to the wrong city, or the code silently breaks. Now ask yourself, which agent caused it? At what step? And once you figure that out, how do you actually fix the team so it doesn't happen again? This is the puzzle at the heart of the survey we're discussing today, which proposes a unified way of thinking about the entire life cycle of large language model-based multi-agent systems. The motivation here is grounded in a real tension in the field. Individual language model agents have become remarkably capable. They can reason step by step, plan multi-step actions, call tools, and maintain memory across interactions. But when tasks get long and complex, packing all of that capability into a single agent creates conflicts in prompt design, context budgets, and behavioral objectives. The natural response has been to split work across multiple specialized agents that communicate and coordinate, and that works up to a point. The trouble is that tighter coordination creates tighter coupling, and tighter coupling means that a small local error, like one agent hallucinating a fact or misrouting a message, can cascade through the system and produce a failure whose root cause is buried under many layers of downstream consequences. Think of it like a game of telephone, where each player also acts on what they heard. So by the end, you don't just have a garbled message, you have a chain of decisions built on that garbled message, and tracing back to the original whisper becomes genuinely hard. The authors point out that prior surveys have tended to look at pieces of this puzzle in isolation. One body of work catalogs individual agent capabilities. Another looks at multi-agent collaboration patterns. A third, newer line examines self-evolution, meaning how agents update their own prompts, tools, or workflows from feedback. But nobody had stitched these threads together into a coherent operational lifecycle, and crucially, the question of failure attribution, of how you actually diagnose what went wrong in a multi-agent run, had not been treated systematically at all. This survey's central organizing idea is what they call the life progression, which stands for lay the capability foundation, integrate agents through collaboration, find faults through attribution, and evolve through self-improvement. The argument is that these 4 stages are not just related, they are causally dependent. What an individual agent can do constrains how a team can be organized. How the team is organized determines what failures are even observable, and what failures you can attribute determines what kinds of self-improvement are possible. Let's walk through each stage. The first stage covers individual intelligence, and here, the authors formalize an agent as a structured decision system with 4 interacting modules: reasoning, memory, planning, and tool use. At each time step, the agent observes the environment, retrieves relevant context from memory, reasons over that context, plans a sequence of actions, selects an action and executes it through tools, observes the result, and updates memory. Within reasoning, they organize the literature by where in the pipeline the intervention happens. Input stage enhancement covers things like retrieval, augmented generation, and multimodal grounding. Reasoning process enhancement covers chain of thought, tree of thoughts, and process reward models that score each reasoning step rather than just the final answer. And output stage regulation covers hallucination detection methods like self-check GPT and semantic entropy, along with decoding time interventions and refusal training. Memory gets a similar life cycle treatment, from how raw experience gets transformed into storable entries, to how it's organized in flat lists, graphs, or trees, to how stale entries decay or get rewritten, to how relevant memories are retrieved and injected back into the reasoning loop. The second stage covers multi-agent collaboration, where the authors organize the design space along four axes: roles, communication, orchestration, and interaction. Roles concern what specialized capabilities each agent has and how they get assigned. Communication covers both the modes, like broadcast versus point-to-point, and the protocols, including emerging standards like the Model Context Protocol and agent-to-agent protocols that are starting to make agent ecosystems interoperable across vendors. Orchestration is the topology question: centralized, hub and spoke, versus distributed peer structures versus hybrid arrangements. And interaction covers the actual information flow patterns, like debate, voting, or hierarchical delegation. The third stage, and arguably the most novel contribution of the survey, is failure attribution. The setup is this: given a long execution trace from a multi-agent system that produced a bad outcome, can we identify which agent and which step is the root cause? The authors organize the methods into three families: data-driven approaches, train classifiers, or use language models as judges on annotated failure traces. Constraint-guided methods specify rules or invariants that a correct execution should satisfy and flag violations. Causal inference methods try to model counterfactuals, asking what would have happened if a particular agent's output had been different. They also propose a taxonomy of failure types organized along three dimensions: where the failure originates in the system structure, at what execution stage it manifests, and where it sits in the causal lifecycle from initial fault to final symptom. The key insight here is that attribution is not just a diagnostic exercise. It's the bridge to improvement, because if you can localize the failure to a specific agent, role, or coordination pattern, you've dramatically narrowed the search space for what to change. The fourth stage is self-evolution, and the authors organize this into three scopes. Agentic self-evolution refines individual agents, things like updating their prompts, growing their memory, or expanding their tool repertoire. Systemic self-evolution restructures the team itself, changing role assignments, topologies, or communication protocols based on observed performance. And meta self-evolution operates on the evolution process itself, learning how to evolve more efficiently. The crucial connection back to attribution is this: without reliable diagnosis, self-improvement is just blind search, but with attribution, you can do targeted intervention. The survey calls this the attribution evolution closed loop, and they argue it's the missing piece that would let multi-agent systems move from human-engineered coordination towards something genuinely self-organizing. Now, for the limitations and open questions. The authors are upfront that several boundary problems remain unsolved. Cross-capability evaluation, meaning how an improvement in memory affects planning performance, is essentially absent from current benchmarks. Efficiency metrics, like token consumption, latency, and cost, are rarely incorporated even though they matter enormously in practice. Memory design choices interact in poorly understood ways, with no systematic study of which formation, storage, and retrieval combinations work best for which tasks. Failure attribution methods struggle with long execution traces where causal chains are deeply tangled, and self-evolution methods that work in toy settings often don't scale because exploration in the space of team structures is combinatorially explosive. There's also a deeper philosophical worry the survey gestures at, which is that as systems become more self-modifying, our ability to predict and constrain their behavior may decrease faster than our ability to diagnose it improves. Now let's walk through some questions you might have after hearing all of this. First, why is failure attribution in multi-agent systems harder than just debugging a regular software system? The reason is that in a traditional program, the control flow is explicit and deterministic, so you can step through and see exactly what happened. In a multi-agent system, each agent's output is a stochastic generation from a language model, and downstream agents act on those generations in ways that compound. A subtle hallucination at step 3 might not cause visible problems until step 12, and by then, the agent that's actually misbehaving may be acting reasonably given the corrupted input it received. So you're not just looking for a bug, you're trying to untangle a causal chain through a noisy, partially observable process. Second, what makes the attribution evolution loop the key insight of this survey, rather than just a nice framing? The argument is that prior work treated attribution and self-improvement as separate problems, but they're actually two halves of a single feedback control system. Attribution without action is just a diagnostic report nobody acts on. Action without attribution is random tinkering. The loop only becomes powerful when failure diagnosis directly shapes what gets modified, which agent gets retrained, which role gets reassigned, which communication channel gets restructured. That tight coupling is what would let multi-agent systems improve themselves with the same kind of directed efficiency that gradient descent gives us in supervised learning. Third, why do the authors emphasize that collaborative structures shape what failures can be observed? The point is subtle, but important. If your team has a centralized orchestrator that logs every message, you can attribute failures pretty granularly. But if your team uses a fully distributed protocol where agents make local decisions based on partial views, then some failures are simply invisible from any single vantage point. So the choice of topology isn't just an efficiency or capability decision. It's also a decision about observability, and therefore about what you can ever hope to fix. This is why the 4 life stages have to be thought of together rather than optimized in isolation. For large-scale recommendation systems serving hundreds of millions of users, this survey's ideas land in some unexpectedly practical places. Modern recommendation pipelines are increasingly built as multi-agent or multi-stage systems with separate components handling candidate retrieval, ranking, diversification, explanation generation, and policy compliance. And as language model-based agents enter these pipelines for things like query understanding, content summarization, or conversational recommendation, the failure attribution problem becomes very real. When user engagement drops on a particular slice of traffic, which stage caused it? The retrieval agent fetching irrelevant candidates? The ranking agent miscalibrating freshness against relevance? A safety filter being too aggressive? Borrowing the life framing, you'd instrument each stage with attribution-friendly logging, then use causal inference style counterfactual analysis on offline replays to localize regressions, and feed those signals into targeted self-evolution loops that retrain or reprompt only the responsible component rather than relaunching the whole stack. The self-evolution scope distinction is also directly useful in production. Agentic evolution maps cleanly onto continual learning for individual ranking models or prompt refinement for language model-based feature extractors. Systemic evolution maps onto pipeline architecture changes, like deciding when to add a re-ranking stage or restructure the candidate funnel based on observed failure patterns. And the memory lifecycle ideas, particularly typed routing and utility-driven retention, offer a principled vocabulary for user modeling, where you're constantly deciding which interaction signals to keep, how to consolidate them, and how to retrieve them at serving time under tight latency budgets. The survey's core message, that diagnosis and improvement must be designed together as a closed loop, is exactly the discipline that production recommendation teams need as their systems become more agentic and less amenable to traditional offline metrics alone.